friends. This is another episode of the program Empire of Lies, in which we discuss manipulation and disinformation in the Russian media. Putin between Oreshnik and Pushkin, how Russian propaganda sells a threat to Europe. Russia is back on the world stage, not as a diplomat or partner, but as a source of threats. Vladimir Putin's latest speech at the Valdai Discussion Club, blown out of proportion by the program 60 Minutes, became the quintessence of Kremlin rhetoric, a mixture of nuclear allusions, historical citations, and cheap shots at the West. Putin speaks of new military developments, of Oreshnik, an obscure euphemism for a nuclear system, compares NATO to a paper tiger, and threatens a harsh response to Europe for its militarization. All this is accompanied by theatrical quotations from Pushkin and Orwell, as well as nostalgia for the songs of the band Lyube. But behind the literary veneer lies a simple goal: to convince Russians and Europeans that Moscow is ready for confrontation and that compromise is unnecessary. Europe as an enemy, Trump as an interlocutor. It's significant that Putin's speech portrays Europe as the main aggressor, a warmonger. European capitals are supposedly becoming centres of threat, and it's there that NATO trainers and instructors are supposedly fighting on Ukraine's side. But at the same time, words of respect are addressed to Donald Trump. He listens, he's straightforward, he's without hypocrisy. Thus, a false contrast is created. Europe is a hypocritical enemy, while the United States, represented by Trump, is a potential partner. This framework is important. The Kremlin understands that a split between Europe and the United States is a strategic goal. For domestic audiences, such assessments create the image of a senior comrade with whom negotiations can be made, while simultaneously reinforcing the idea of Europe as a weak, cowardly adversary. There's no defense against a crowbar. The most dangerous part of the speech concerns nuclear weapons. Putin speaks of new systems, of a high level of modernity, supposedly higher than that of any country. The phrase, "there's no defense against a crowbar except another crowbar," and it always appears. This is a veiled threat, essentially a promise that Russia will always find a way to respond, even if it involves a nuclear exchange. European viewers should understand this is not just rhetoric. This is the normalization of nuclear blackmail in public discourse, where Pushkin's poems coexist with talk of ballistic missiles. A simulacrum of great culture. The way Putin's speech was presented is telling. He quotes Pushkin's Borodino Anniversary, as if integrating the war against Ukraine into the narrative of the battle of all Europe against Russia. For Russian audiences, this is a familiar trope, history as a justification for eternal confrontation. But in the European context, such an appeal appears particularly cynical. Culture is being used not for reconciliation, but for militarization. In my opinion, President Trump, we've known him for a long time, is a bit of a shocker. We all see it, the whole world sees it. But he's basically the kind of person who listens, oddly enough. He listens, hears, and reacts. So basically, he's a comfortable interlocutor, I would say. The American president had a closed intelligence briefing scheduled for 11 a.m. Washington time. That's when Putin began his speech. Putin warned President Trump against the idea of the United States handing over Tomahawk missiles capable of striking Moscow to NATO, which would then send them to Ukraine. As for the Tomahawks, they're powerful weapons. Admittedly, they're not exactly modern, but they're powerful and pose a threat. And of course, this won't change the balance of power on the battlefield. Putin may be calling the transfer of Tomahawks to Kyiv a qualitatively new stage of escalation. Reuters writes that the likelihood of this is extremely low. The American military-industrial complex produces from 55 to 90 missiles per year, and the US Army itself needs them. Why this is dangerous for Europe. The propaganda of 60 Minutes turned Putin's 4-hour speech into a triumphant manifesto of strength. We have more missiles than the US. We will restore relations only on our terms. NATO is a paper tiger. The goal is obvious, to convince Russians that the world is on the brink of war, and therefore they need to consolidate around their leader. But the hidden target of this rhetoric is Europe. Every threat, every hint of attacks on infrastructure, every image of an eternal enemy is an attempt to sow fear and doubt within the EU. The Kremlin wants European societies to believe it's better to give in than to risk catastrophe. Conclusion: myth versus reality. In reality, behind the grandiose words lies weakness. Russia is indeed spending its last reserves on war. Its economy relies on selling raw materials to China and India, and the rhetoric of mobilization is needed to hide its losses. By turning Putin's speech into a literary spectacle reminiscent of Orwell and Pushkin, Russian television is masking a simple truth. Moscow fears a future where its myths no longer hold. For Europe, the lesson here is clear. The louder the threats of a paper tiger, the greater the Kremlin's fear of the real power of a united West. Therefore, the best response to nuclear blackmail is not concessions, but firm unity and support for Ukraine. This was the program Empire of Lies. See you soon.